Hello everyone, welcome back for another book review. So today we are talking about this book. So this is The Mighty Dead, Communing with the Ancestors of Witchcraft by Christopher Penczak. So I knew when I bought this, I bought it really for the title and the cover because it looked awesome. And I had high hopes of what it would be, and it isn't. It isn't what I wanted it to be, and that's kind of a me thing because once you read it and then you look at the description on the back and then you look at the little tagline at the bottom, you're like, oh, that's what you meant. Oh, because it's not what I wanted from a book. So the target audience of this book may not really fit into what my audience likes or what most witches do. And so what I mean by that is if you're into, and I'm probably gonna mispronounce it, the Kabbalah something, Hermetic, witchcraft, things, stuff, New Age, that section, and like Ascended Masters and stuff, this is your book. My mother-in-law was into that a lot more than I ever have been and will be. And so it talks about that mostly. The majority of this book is based out of those kind of principles. I don't follow again, I don't know how to pronounce it. Kabbalah, that thing, I don't follow it. It's not something that interests me whatsoever. So it's not something I actively pursue. Now, if it happens to be spread into what we use modernly as witchcraft, whatever, I'm sure there's different principles of things that are used in modern witchcraft that came from that. Sure, probably. But I don't actively really hunt down that specific tradition. I don't care. It doesn't interest me in the slightest. Same with the idea of Ascended Masters and just really any ascension of the soul things. That's why I don't really like Buddhism, because I don't like the idea that like your soul is impure to some degree and that inevitably you're gonna hit some higher point, whatever that point may be, and that is when you don't have to incarnate anymore. And then you can become a teacher of sorts from the other side and you ascend to a godlike kind of position. Not my thing. Not my jam. I don't like this idea of an ascended master of sorts. Just, no. We're humans here to have a human experience. And this gets way more, and the only way I can really describe it is the woo-woo. Like, that's the only way that I could, like, pinpoint it, because it's not quite the Love and Light crowd, though it does have a lot of reminiscent things to it that you find there. And it's not exactly just like the overall branching New Age, but again, a lot of those do fall into, like, you know, there's a big overlap in those two Venn diagrams, you know? And it's just not something I care about. And so that being the majority of this book, A, got me really bored with this one, and B, got me nervous about where the Temple of Witchcraft series is going for like the foreseeable books, because I'm like, what if we have books, because I think he does, that are like just dedicated to that? I'm gonna be so bored. Like, am I gonna skip it? Because like, I don't care at all. It's not something that even vaguely interests me. So that being said, this is not one of my favorites from Penczak. It doesn't have the usual charm that I like of his books. It is well researched. It's just not a topic I care about in the slightest. Other major thing he focused on in this book is another thing I don't care about. And that is focusing on the leaders of witchcraft that are from the previous century turn. So those who were going from the 1800s to the 1900s, that generation, it's a big generation to say the least, but those people, I just don't care. I don't really care to learn about Aleister Crowley. I don't really care about Dion Fortune. I don't really care about Doreen Valiente. Like, I know they have their place. And when you're wanting to know the history of witchcraft, especially modern witchcraft, yeah, they're names you need to know. You need to have a basic understanding of them. But from there, and like, it was weird that even like Gerald Gardner was like kind of mentioned, but wasn't like the front for once, which was like, okay. But I don't really care. And it was just one of those things that it's like, yeah, it's important, but also they lived in a completely different world than us at this point. It's been a full century since they really were around. Because again, a lot of it was that turn of the century time. And so that was when they were like, I think a lot of them were born in the 1800s and then died, you know, 1930s, 40s, whatever. So you know, that era. Like, we're there for this turn of the century now. And it's like, a lot has changed. The world as a whole is completely different than the world they lived in. Witchcraft is very different from the world they lived in. And so it's like, yes, it's interesting and good to know about them, but like, I don't want to put all of my magical focus from people in a society that like doesn't even exist anymore. The witchcraft community is completely different than what they had. We're very out of the broom closet. Witchcraft laws in like England have been officially taken off the books. And then you also have pagan pride everywhere. And there are so many shops that can just freely be available. There are thousands of books available for people to read. There are so many courses that you couldn't even keep track of different witchcraft trainings that you can do. And there are so many witches like myself who teach other people witchcraft. And it's like, that really wasn't a thing back then. And so it's like, yes, it's good to know about them, but let's talk about the ones in the past century, like the past, you know, from like the 60s onwards, that really started the revolution of where we're experiencing the joys of that now. Because they were just bringing witchcraft out of the complete dark at the turn of the last century. But this one is when we started to really actually get it in our hands. This is when a lot of books were being published, and a lot of covens, and a lot of publicity really started to take hold, and a lot of tradition started to bloom. And I'm more interested in like the 60s plus. Give me the history with Raymond Buckland, which granted, to be fair, he was still alive when this book was published, so I don't know if he would have been looped in, but he only gave like, in this book, a paragraph really, of the more recent deaths. So Scott Cunningham obviously is the one that I was waiting. At some point, could we talk about him? He was revolutionary for his time. He was like the first one actively being like, you don't need a coven. You don't need to be initiated by a witch, because guess what? Who initiated the first witch? Like, big deal. And that really wasn't emphasized at all. And how modern witchcraft happens. I don't care about the history that much of witchcraft. And that was what this book was about. And it was just this constant, the masters of the ancient world, the masters of the old craft. And it's like, that's cool, that's great. I just don't care. So that was kind of the main focus of this book. And so if that's something that interests you, you'll be fine. You will love this book. If you love Ascended Masters and Masters of different things, and the, again, I don't know how to say it, but the Kabbalah, that thing, that tradition, whatever, if that interests you, you are set. If you want to have a lot of emphasis pulling back from, again, not the previous one, but the one before that, 18 to 1900s, those authors and those people in the field, yeah, you'll be covered. The other thing is that towards the very end of the book, he does a little bit on funeral practices in the modern world, kind of. So it felt like a very summed down version of the Pagan Book of Living and Dying. And again, there is a focus on what you're supposed to do as a witch. And like, he does have like a couple throw out sentences of, you know, like, well, you know, you don't always have like the perfect death situation to be doing stuff. But, you know, like anointing the body, anointing the casket, doing these elaborate rituals around the casket. And it's like, you know, that's cool, but how many of us are actually gonna do that? And how many of us are actually gonna be able to perform that way? Because not a lot of us are out here trying to be a priest or priestess as a part of the community and serving the community in that way. A lot of us are solitary practitioners. We're not out here trying to do things for the community at large. We're not being called because another witch is dying and they need a witch to deal with it. Like, that's just not the world we live in. There are people doing that, and that's great, but that's not the majority. And like, the people like myself who aren't gonna do that, we kind of get left behind in the dust. And so that was just like one of those things where it's like, really? Thankfully he doesn't tell you to like go have a home cremation like Living and Dying did, because I'm still not convinced that was legal. As a whole, this book isn't what I wanted it to be. I was looking for a book to help me honor my ancestors. And like, he does have a little bit, which to be fair was kind of nice. He has like two kind of trains that you can follow the path for, one of which is for your blood ancestry, which I think is a bit overrated, honestly, just because we share DNA. Like, an itty bitty little percentage of shared DNA doesn't really make, like, it that important, really. But he does include your, like, adoptive family, which was nice. I was really proud of him for actually including that. Again, that was, like, 1% of the book, if that. The rest of it was the Ascended Masters of varying different degrees, and honestly, it was rough to get through. If you're hoping for like a casual read of any kind, I mean, granted, witchcraft books aren't really much casual reads. The trendy books are, but for the most part, this one was a lot more like a history book, academic kind of vibes. But overall, I just had hoped that it was going to be something that it wasn't. I wanted to know how to honor my ancestors, whether they are friends that I've known who've passed, whether it is my family who has passed, or even wanting to honor, like, Scott Cunningham and doing something with him. There was nothing. And, I mean, really. And, like, there was a lot of warnings about working with them, and it was really, like, the Ascended Masters thing, which is, like, again, I'm not big on that belief at all, so didn't really apply. Also had kind of hoped for something a little bit more in-depth for the funeral practices. Honestly, at this point, I think next year, because again, I'm not buying the rest of this year, except for the Yule book for the Sabbath series. But next year, I think I'm actually going to buy the physical copies of Caitlin Doughty, Ask a Mortician's books, and talk about them here, because I feel like there's just not a lot of information for witches on that topic. And while it's not Wiccan and witchcraft and anything pagan focused, they are really good information for those death curious. And I find that people that seek out witches also will seek us out for, like, things of that nature. Because, like, at my last funeral that I went to earlier this month, I literally had my niece just, like, bombarding me with questions about death and the processes involved and the logistics and questions that people have that they may not be having answered. Like, my sister refuses to talk about any of things death related. Like, she can't handle that conversation whatsoever. And so naturally, me being the aunt, I'm like, I don't mind telling you stuff. Like, why are there benches in a cemetery? Like, the engraved grave looking benches. And what happens to a body? Why do they just put the box straight down? What's that container around it about? How do they keep the ground flat? Why does sometimes it dip? Like, there's a lot of questions that it's like, you know? And, like, it's just stuff like that. And, like, just, there's a lot. And so I'm ready to bring those books. She has, I think, 3 now? I don't know if she's working on a 4th. But she at least has 3. And so I'm planning on getting those, and then we will talk about them here sometime next year, because I just feel like those are important to have in your repertoire. If you're curious about death things, go check out her channel. She has a lot of various content, and of course, I'm trying to find a good book for the pagans. I just haven't found it yet, and so we shall see. So anyways, overall, this book isn't terrible. It's just not what I wanted it to be. I would love to hear your thoughts on this one in the comments down below. Thank you to my patrons. If you would like to support me, it is patreon.com/nightwillowcrafts. Do make sure to like and subscribe. I post every single day here on the channel. And until next time, thank you so much for watching, and blessed be.